My new roommate hates my boyfriend, but I think he has a secret reason. The moment Angelo walked into our apartment that morning, it was like an ice storm hit. A chilling cold trailed after him into the room, and it was clear from the sharp gaze he leveled at my boyfriend, Tom, and me. My hand froze on the spot where it was caressing Tom's dark hair, but sweet Tom was oblivious to my roommate. Angelo's gaze directed us and chatted away about the characters in the TV series we were watching. Tom and I were seated on the couch, wrapped around in each other in truth, and I was content to watch him like that. Angelo, on the other hand, stood at the doorway for a few long seconds, holding my attention captive with his intensity of his gaze. His eyes were hard, and he held himself so rigidly that he looked almost mechanical, all the while his eyes trained on Tom's head on my chest, and the protective arm I wrapped around his midsection. He finally seemed to come to himself, and walked stiffly towards the refrigerator that stood in the corner of the living room. "Oh, hi, Angelo," Tom greeted him cheerfully. "Hi," he said back, his voice barely above a murmur. "It's nice seeing you again. You were sleeping last night when we came in. I'd have said hi." "Well, not for long," Angelo replied dryly. "You both made enough noise to wake the dead." He opened the fridge and rummaged through it loudly. Soon, he slammed it shut and whirled sharply on us. "What happened to the bag of chips?" "Oh, that?" Tom said gaily. "I snacked on it last night. Jamie and I were just going to pop to the store next door to get another once this episode was over." Angelo eyed Tom with so much disdain that my usual cheerful boyfriend recoiled like he'd been stung. "You shouldn't take what isn't yours, Tom." The bite in his words was unmistakable. "Come on," I said, irritated. "It's just food, and we've always shared." "It's okay, Jamie," Tom said, patting my hands lightly. Maybe Angelo just really needed the chips. "Yes, that's Tom, always trying to understand people's perspective. We'll get you more chips in a second." Tom called at Angelo's already retreating figure. "I guess he's just in a mood. No need to be upset, Jamie." I shook my head, still watching Angelo retreat down the hallway. "I don't think so." Flashback. 3 weeks ago. "Jamie," Angelo called my attention from my laptop screen. "You know, I've been turning over an idea in my mind for the past few days." I sat across from Angelo in a coffee house across the street. We had a large scraping sound at the point and both looked up. It was someone pulling out the chair next to us. We watched as the person, only his urban hair visible to us, sat down in the chair. He took time placing his personal items on the chair and finally looked up. He was pretty. One of those oval eyes, high cheekbones, and his small round mouth. "Hi," he smiled. He smiled with teeth so bright it was like a ray of sunshine. "I'm Tom. Sorry to intrude. There are just no free seats." "It's all right," Angelo said and introduced us. Tom got talking immediately, telling us a little about himself and his work as a teaching assistant at an art school. Then the conversation veered towards us. "So I was watching you guys as I placed my order and scanned for the tables. You seem pretty close. Are you like friends or boyfriends?" "Roommates," I said. "Oh, I see," Tom said. "You seem pretty close." "That might be because we are friends," Angelo said dryly, eyebrows arching. 5 days later, Angelo was perched on an armchair, looking slightly out of place. We were at a friend's birthday party, and loud music was on. Most people had paired up dancing, but Angelo just sat, nursing his single drink. I walked up to him. "Why aren't you dancing?" He shrugged. "I don't know, just not my thing." "Come on," I said, taking his hand as a slow song began. "No, Jamie," he said, a weird look on his face. "Is the mighty Angelo now afraid of a little dance?" I smiled, teasing. He reluctantly let me pull him up, and when he stood facing me, I could see that he was a little anxious. I smiled reassuringly at him and whispered, "Follow my lead." We moved around suavely, Angelo getting into the rhythm once he stopped minding the people around us. "You move well," I commented. "What were you so nervous about?" He chuckled. "My 2 left feet." "Well, that's why you have me. Jamie, the miraculous cure for 2 left feet." We laughed slightly and settled quietly into the dance as a sweet melody of music washed over us. My eyes caught Angelo, and the look in them was so tender it felt like a punch in my gut. I pulled back without realizing and broke the rhythm. The mighty Angelo suffering from 2 left feet problem, he teased, chuckling. I looked up at him, catching his eyes again, but that look was gone. All I saw in them was friendly, playful laughter. I thought I must have imagined the look. An hour later, I walked back from a party with Angelo, both of us slightly drunk. It was a good thing. The house was not too far away. We made jokes as we walked, bringing up embarrassing stories we knew about each other. I think I felt rain, Angelo said, and sure enough, a huge fat drop fell on my exposed nose. We began to walk faster, hoping to beat the rain before it started, but the skies seemed to have other plans. The drops became a light shower, and before we had the time to walk a few feet, it was pouring heavily. We exchanged a quick look, and without speaking, we both started running. This did nothing but fill us with the thrill of childhood, as the rain pounded heavily on us, regardless. Wait! Wait! Angelo gasped for breath. He took off his large coat and feigned it over our heads like an umbrella. I held the other side as we huddled together and ran the rest of the way home. We dissolved into laughter the moment we entered into our building, and for no reason at all, other than it was fun, we ran up the stairs to our apartment. We stood in front of the door, clutching our sides for the long second before finally stepping in. A few minutes later, "Wow, look who's back," Angelo said, voice dripping with so much sarcasm that I could run a bath with it. "Yeah, that's me," Tom responded, sunshine in his voice. We opened the door to find Tom laying on the couch and watching TV. I forgot to mention to Angelo that he would be here. Tom and I have been seeing each other a lot in these last 5 days. We had even shared 1 or 2 kisses. I was really into him, and I invited him over that day. It was my day off. He didn't want to come to the party, so I went by myself. And Angelo, on the other hand, went straight from work to the party. To what do I owe the pleasure? Actually, Tom said as I returned with his food. He looked up at me with the same smile that melted my heart. "Jamie and I are a thing now. I thought he would have told you." Angelo froze visibly as Tom said this. He turned towards me and asked with an indefinable expression on his face. In truth, I did think less than 5 days together was too soon to be a thing, and wanted to wait until I was sure to ask Tom out. But heck, if we were already kissing this early, who said we couldn't be a thing? So I nodded at Angelo, expecting him to break into a smile for me. "Yes, I haven't gotten around to making it official yet." "I see. Good luck with that," Angelo replied briskly, and turned on his heels. There was an unmistakable look of hurt on his face as he walked away. 2 days later, Tom made coffee while I chatted from the living room. Both of us were running on fumes after the late-night binge of Friends. The struggle to function after only a few hours of sleep was real. Angelo shuffled into the kitchen, his hair sticking out at odd angles. As his pajamas rumpled, he looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. "Morning, Angelo," Tom greeted. "Want a cup of coffee?" Angelo didn't even glance his way. "No, thank you," he mumbled, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge, before disappearing again without another word. I exchanged a look with Tom, who just shrugged and went back to stirring his coffee. Tom brought 2 steaming mugs to the coffee table, and one sip had me let out an appreciative moan. "You know, we had a great weekend," Tom said, smiling. "Maybe we could plan something even more fun next weekend. But first you have to—" "Jamie," Angelo interrupted sharply, reappearing from the hallway. "Did you settle the water bill?" I blinked, caught off guard. Angelo usually paid it, since the office was on his way to work. It was a hassle that required in-person payment, and he'd always handled it. I reminded him of this, but he wasn't having any of it. "Well, you've got more free time, especially since you spent so much of it with Tom," Angelo snapped. "I'm busier than you, so it's only fair if you handle it." Tom, clearly trying to medicate, jumped in. "I think Jamie just assumed you'd take care of it, since it's closer to your workplace. But I don't remember asking for your opinion, Tom." Angelo cut him off coldly before stalking back to his room. Tom sat there for a moment, stunned. He finally muttered, "That was pretty rude." His frustration at Angelo's treatment of him was evident at last. A week later. The following week, Angelo and I cooked dinner together, chatting as we worked. He was back to his usual upbeat self, animatedly recounting something he saw in the park earlier. Maybe I had just imagined his strange attitude the past week. Or he just had something going on. He stirred a pot of sauce while I cleared the ingredients off the counter. As he narrated his story, trying to follow my movements with his eyes, the spoon slipped from his hand. Splatter of brown sauce everywhere. "Oh my God," he groaned. "Why am I such a klutz?" "Maybe you got two left hands," I teased, laughing as I remembered the party incident. He shook his head, chuckling. "This is why I hide my weaknesses. People like you just use them against me." We both went down to grab the spoon and ended up bumping heads. For some reason, it left us laughing, uncontrollably, when our eyes met. I swore there was something soft in his gaze, again. My throat suddenly went dry, and I struggled to find words. "Hey, you guys!" came Tom's voice from the doorway. I looked up to see him standing there, jangling a set of keys. Angelo stood quickly, his warm demeanor vanishing. "How did you get in here?" he asked coldly. Tom smirked, shaking keys. I figured Jamie would want me to have a key, so I made a copy to surprise him. What? My jaw dropped. "That's not how it works, Tom," Angelo said with his tone sharp. "You wait for someone to give you a key, not just decide for yourself." He yanked the apron off, hung it up and turned to me. "You can finish this, right?" Without waiting for my answer, he walked out, leaving the tension thick in the room. Flashback end. Over the past 3 weeks, with experience after experience, I had come to the unshakable conclusion that Angelo simply disliked Tom. I couldn't imagine what he had done to deserve such blatant dislike. Angelo was either cold or dismissive towards him, and I was determined to get to the root of this behavior the next time I witnessed it. It took me a while to figure out that Angelo had something against my boyfriend. He was always back to his usual self the moment Tom left, and I chalked the things I observed up, to begin in a mood or something else. But noticing he would grow sullen, and when I mentioned Tom or talked about something we were doing together, I knew for the fact that something was up. Angelo and I hit it off right away when we became roommates, and even had adopted each other's friend groups. We liked the same things, the same people, and so I couldn't imagine why he couldn't bring himself to like Tom. He wasn't even a regular person but my boyfriend. If he couldn't find the decency to be polite, if not friendly, with my boyfriend, then I was done playing it cool. 2 weeks later, I lay on the couch with my head in Tom's lap. My body turned sideways. We had just resolved our second fight. This time it was over a basketball game. Tom and I insisted I'd take him instead of Angelo, even though he had no interest in the sport. After a heated argument, and him cutting up our tickets, it took a few days of apologies to move past it. Now that we're together in the living room for the first time in days, feeling closer than ever, Angelo, who usually stayed in his room when we were together, was sitting across the room. Scrolling through his phone, he was clearly concentrating on something. Despite Tom's silence, I knew Angelo's attitude was starting to get to him. Tom and I sat with our hands entwined, and he admittedly told me about his new project with his students. As I listened, I noticed something unusual. Angelo's gaze was fixed on us, not with his usual cold glare, but with something subtler. He was watching us, his eyes darting anywhere. Whenever I looked up, I pretended to close my eyes for a moment and watched him carefully under my lowered eyebrows. He was watching us, with a wistful look in his eye, and I felt like he was watching me. "Can you believe it?" Tom began. Everyone saw the same video clip, but their interpretations and paintings were so different. "Oh, wow," Angelo deadpanned. The art teacher discovers perspective. Tom, always animated, tried to explain the point of how each person remembers the clip differently, but Angelo's sarcastic tone irritated me. "Quite interesting," Angelo said with a mocking compliment. I had enough of his cold glances and snide remarks. "Angelo," I said firmly, "come into the kitchen with me for a moment." "Why?" he asked, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Into the kitchen. Now." I didn't look to see if he followed. I knew he would. The tone in my voice is one that he was used to, and it was clear I wasn't playing around anymore. It was time to settle things. I'd rather keep Tom out of this. 2 minutes later, I stood by the kitchen counter, leaning against it, and Angelo stood across from me by the door, his arms in his pockets. We both seemed to hold our breaths, waiting for the other person to speak. "What's your deal with Tom?" I asked. "What do you mean, what's my deal with Tom?" he retorted. "There's no deal." "Oh, spare me," I replied. Do you think I haven't noticed your attitude you put up whenever he's around? The rudeness, the bitter sarcasm, the snide remarks like you just made about his project? I couldn't see my own face, but I was sure I looked irritated as a monkey who had just lost his banana. Angelo must have read that look because he deflated like a punctured balloon. He sighed heavily, and his face took on a troubled look, as though he's contemplating something. Then he just blurted out, "It's not Tom that I can't stand. It's the fact that he's with you." He buried his face in his palms the moment he said that, and whispered over and over, "Oh my God, oh my God." I did not understand. I stepped closer to him and lifted his face. He looked mortified. And then it hit me. The reason Angelo could not stand Tom being with me, the reason I had been catching those glances, the reason for his coldness, Angelo had feelings for me. "Jamie," Angelo said, "I've had a crush on you since we became roommates, but it seemed like you just wanted a friendship. It's got more serious with time, and I was just preparing to, damn it, and ask you out when you met Tom and started going out with him." I just stared at him, my mouth slightly agape. How could I have misread him so much? I thought he just wanted a friendship as well. Angelo looked deep into my eyes, something so tender in his, and stepped closer to me, closing the gap between us. I stared back, mesmerized. As his head descended, his lips were almost on mine before I came back to myself, pulling away. "I'm sorry, Angelo," I said, and walked away flustered. 2 days later, I still couldn't get over the fact that Angelo almost kissed me. The realization made me feel like shit inside. And all I could think about as I walked away from that kiss was, what about Tom? Worse still was the fact that I couldn't get the look of Angelo's face as I pulled away out of my head. He looked like I'd splashed water all over him, like he'd bared his soul to me. And I'd thrown it down in the ground and stomped on it. But what could I have done? I have a boyfriend whom I like very much, and I wasn't about to throw away just because my roommate confessed to liking me. I still couldn't wrap my head around the fact that Angelo had a crush on me at some point, that the crush had grown into more. I spent the better part of our first month as roommates daydreaming about the relationship with him, and covering myself that he didn't feel the same way, but he'd actually liked me. The atmosphere, now even weirder than when he was being an obvious ass, and I tried whenever I could to dodge being at home. The problem was Tom loved coming to my place, and I couldn't explain to him why I wanted to avoid being there altogether. Ever since, that almost kiss had been a mess. I was visibly flustered around Angelo, who had stopped the whole attitude he was going on. He was no longer cold or rude or anything, only entering our shared space when necessary, and when he came out, he was just quiet. He said polite hellos to Tom and me, but nothing else. A handful of times Angelo came out into the common area. I caught him staring at me, which was possible because I was staring at him. Our eyes would even meet as we tried to avoid each other, or we would bump awkwardly as we moved around in the kitchen, or past each other in the hall. Each time I met his eyes, I would feel this painful squeeze in my chest. I didn't want to get into what it meant. Slowly, with each hour that passed, I felt the gears turning in my head, and I knew I was arriving at a decision. I would dump Tom because Angelo suddenly confessed some feelings? Would I break Angelo's heart and stay with my boyfriend? 3 days later, after days and days of avoiding each other, awkward bumps in the hallway, and some serious brainstorming, I finally arrived at an answer. No matter how Angelo felt about me, and regardless of the loud what-ifs stirring in my heart, I'd shut the door on that possibility of anything developing with my roommate. I had a boyfriend, we were together, and I wouldn't hurt him over my greed. This decision brought me a modicum of peace and relief. A bit of it was awkward, yet I could still see that Angelo's eyes still held hope at times. I had to talk to him again, painfully, but necessary. I broke it to him. I would be staying with Tom, and it was simply a matter of commitment and loyalty. I didn't want him to feel that my rejection meant something about him. He would make a genuinely great partner, I reassured him, and I was lucky to have him as a friend. Despite what I initially thought, the conversation seemed to bring him some relief. He had been walking on eggshells for the past 5 days. He had told me he'd been oscillating fast between hope and fear, that he was glad I made a decision and didn't just leave him hanging. I assured him that I would give him space to deal with it and would keep my relationship out of his face. for the time being. We laughed about that. But he expressed his gratitude. All in all, a successful letdown. The next day, it was the weekend, and I had Tom on the phone discussing plans. He wanted to come over, but I suggested that we'd hang out at his place instead. When he asked why, I simply told him that Angelo seemed to be in a bad place currently, and I was trying to give him some space. Tom straight up refused. He preferred to hang out at my place. He argued, and he didn't know why he had to stay away because of Angelo's had personal issues. He insisted that if I could live there despite Angelo's issues, then he could also visit in spite of them. It took a while to convince him, which I didn't understand because Tom usually was so agreeable, but we finally opted for going out instead. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. I was expecting nobody, and when I called Angelo, he said he was expecting no one. I paused in the middle of getting ready, curious about who it could be. I peered into the peephole, and it was Tom. He stood in front of the door, a bright smile on his face, his hands crammed with gift bags full of chocolates, balloons and cake. I opened the door and stood aside, confused. "Tom," I said, finally finding my words. "I thought we were going out." Yes, he said airily. "I figured I should drop by and give these to Angelo. You know, a little cheer up." Before I could stop him, he was headed down the hallway and pushing through Angelo's door. I was in his wake and I watched, cringing as he told Angelo I had informed him that he was dealing with some things. He gushed over Angelo, who was dumbfounded to do anything but stare. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Tom was done speaking. He dropped off the gifts on Angelo's table and even pressed a kiss on his cheek. I stood as though rooted to the doorway, and Tom brushed past me into the living room. A week later, the incident with Angelo led to a fight between Tom and I. I couldn't understand why he would show up after I explained Angelo's situation, and we agreed to meet out instead. And I was still ready to chalk that up to Tom's inability to pick on curs sometimes, and the fact that he was always trying to make people feel better, though his acts of kindness, even if they were not really welcomed. I was ready to let it go, because he must have had good intentions. We still went out as planned, to a lovely restaurant that he'd picked. He simply shrugged and said he didn't understand why I wouldn't let him come over just because of Angelo. He informed me that he had noticed the looks exchanged between Angelo and me over a couple of days. He just wanted to be sure nothing was going on there. And then he suddenly began to smile sheepishly when I asked what the matter was. Slightly annoyed, he smiled even more. He revealed to me that the first time he saw Angelo and me together, he had thought we were a couple. He saw the way Angelo looked at me, even then, but he wanted me for himself. He liked me off the bat, and he sat down at our table, not because there were no seats, but because he was trying to get to me. He was ready to tear us apart if we were a couple, he said, laughing now. That's how much he wanted me. I went from slightly annoyed to very annoyed. He had knowingly come over, even when I told him not to. Even though we were a couple, I was still entitled to my privacy, and he had no right to violate it like that. Now, the peace I established with Angelo was most certainly gone. Angelo must think I'm a piece of shit now. To the best of his knowledge, I had promised him to give some space for my relationship, but turned around and not only invited my boyfriend, but also mentioned Angelo's issues? And then, to think that he'd initially thought Angelo and I were a couple, and had approached us, intending to break us up. Now that was crude behavior. When it became clear to him that I didn't find the situation at all funny, he switched to apologize. He said he was sorry over and over again, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Eventually I mellowed and accepted his apology. We were now at his place, as he had become content with us hanging out there in the meantime. We lay in his bed, discussing some plans. I recently offered a position as a teacher's assistant in the creative writing program at his local college. I recently offered a position as teaching assistant in the creative writing program at the local college. I was trying to decide whether to accept it. The salary was huge and would represent a change from my usual unstable writer's income. Not to mention, being offered such a position was an honor. Yet, the hours were too demanding and would likely cut into the time I needed to concentrate on my personal project. Tom, on the other hand, thought it was a wonderful opportunity and insisted I take it. The college was close to his apartment, and he thought I could move in with him. He also wanted me to take a job so I could save the salary. and we could make a down payment on the house together. I couldn't understand him. He wasn't considering how the choice would affect me. All he seemed to care about was what it'd mean for me in a relationship to him. Besides, it was way too early to think about buying a house together. I tried explaining again that I would have to give up things and activities that meant a lot to me just to take the job. He brushed my concerns aside and told me I could just find other things and other projects to fit into my new schedule. And what about my friends, I asked. I would be moving halfway across the city to take this job. And leaving my friend group behind? He shrugged. You can always find new ones. I stared at him, mouth agape. He was being so nonchalant about this. You're taking it. You're taking it. Yes, it's settled, Tom. I said, I'm not taking it. And we're not moving in together. His attitude had me convinced to do the exact opposite of what he'd wanted. He's being too dismissive of my concerns. Tom went ballistic, raging at me, berating me for not caring enough about our relationship to take steps forward strengthening it. He went on a long rant and talked about how he was the only one who put enough effort into the relationship. He went as far as to even accuse me of cheating. Finally, when he saw that I was unmoved by his anger, he threatened to break up with me if I didn't agree to take the job. The next day, Tom had been blowing up my phone all day yesterday. Call after call, text after text, apologies, promises, and despite the police saying that he didn't mean it, finally, I relented to agree to meet with him the following day to talk things out. But even as I sent the message, I wasn't sure I wanted to work things out with him. We'd only been together for 3 months. Yet, I'd already lost count of how many times I've had to deal with his jealousy or his relentless need to have it his way. There was a time he was talking to someone who'd read one of my books. A fan. He interrupted the conversation rudely, made sure to announce he was my boyfriend, and then insulted the poor woman who only wanted to discuss my work. When I confronted him later, he twisted it back on me, claiming I'd been disrespectful to our relationship. Somehow, I ended up apologizing. More recently, he tried to convince me to overhaul my wardrobe because, according to him, I needed a more sophisticated aesthetic. As a writer, when I refused, he sulked for days, only speaking to me again after I agreed to incorporate a few of his suggestions. I never tried to control his choices or dictate who he could talk to, so his behavior baffled me. I felt stifled, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. In contrast, Angelo was my anchor. We patched up our friendship after the early attention, falling back into a comfortable dynamic of roommates and close friends. And as things worsened with Tom, my buried feelings for Angelo began creeping back to the surface. He was everything I needed. A friend, a source of calm, someone who listened. Yet, I never crossed the line. I was loyal, clinging to the hope that Tom would come around. Angelo respected that, offering only his support and the occasional bit of advice. But now, I was losing hope. Feelings for Andrew aside, staying in a relationship where I felt so unhappy didn't make sense. It was a sad decision, but ultimately the right one. I cared for Tom, but I needed to choose myself. When Tom walked in, the weight of my decision must have been written all over my face because he shook his head immediately. "No, Jamie, I won't accept this," he said, his voice already trembling. I stood and gently took his hand, leading him to a seat on the couch. "Tom, please listen to me," I said softly, and he grew quiet, though his expression remained tensed. "I like you very much," I began. "These past few months have meant a lot to me. You know how much I dreamed about us and our future together." He nodded slightly, his misty eyes betraying the emotion he was holding back. It hurt to see him like this, but I pressed on. "I don't think we're very compatible, Tom," I continued. "You like things your way, and that's not wrong, but I need space to do things in a way that works for me. These months have shown me how different we are in that respect." He exhaled sharply, looking up at me with tears threatening to spill. "But Jamie, we've been good together," he said, his voice cracking. "I know, it can be difficult a lot of the time," he added with a weak chuckle. "But I can change. We can work on this." I shook my head gently, offering him a sad smile. "I wish we could, Tom. Maybe if I'd spoken up sooner. but I've reached a point where I feel trapped and unhappy. I don't know how to move forward from here." For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then he let out another long breath, his shoulders slumping. "It's all right, Jamie," he said quietly. "I couldn't stay with you knowing you feel like this. I care about you too much for that." And I pulled him into a close hug. We held each other tightly. Neither of us are saying a word. The silence was heavy. It was almost full of understanding. A bittersweet goodbye to what could have been. Conclusion. After breaking up with Tom, I felt a lightness I hadn't realized I needed. A weight lifted. And from the first time in a while, I felt free to move through life with ease. In the weeks that followed, Angelo and I began to rebuild the friendship we'd lost during my relationship. We started spending more time together, sharing laughs, going to the movies, and rediscovering the connection we'd always had. It wasn't long before our growing affection became undeniable. I told Angelo I wasn't ready to dive into another relationship so soon, and he understood completely. He agreed we should take our time and let things unfold naturally. Slowly, the lines between friendship and something more blurred. When our first kiss finally happened, I didn't pull away. It felt right, like a quiet promise of what was to come. Not long after, I asked him out, and his yes came with the same certainty I felt. As we started discussing the idea of buying a place together, it wasn't hard to picture it. From roommates to partners, our journey had been anything but rushed, but that's what made it so real. The end. Have you ever found yourself in a love triangle? How did you cope? Thank you for watching. Consider becoming a part of the Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.